Sounds good.
First of all, Carl, good to put a face with the name. I think you were not on the last meeting. Both Lene and I were, I think, newcomers to the committee.
Yes, and I was grateful that you decided to be our leader. So that's good.
I'm not sure I decided. I took one for the team. We'll put it that way.
Well, I'm grateful for that. So good to meet you.
You're welcome. So, first order of business is to review and approve the minutes. Cheryl sent those out last week. Did everybody get a chance to read them? Were there any comments? I'll tell you, I did comment on the notes about the roundabout. I'm sorry, about the 4th West, 4th South, and there was comment about the water tank, but it was listed at 4th South and 8th East. So I asked for that correction to be made. And then the other clarification, which I don't think is particularly important, but I did abstain from voting myself in last time, so I can claim that I didn't actually volunteer. But there were enough people to vote, so it didn't require my vote. Were there any other comments about the minutes?
I did delete that one section because it didn't make any sense. So we just have the correct section. It was
Okay.
5A3, and now we only have 3 items.
Okay.
And then I took you off of the voting for yourself.
Right. Welcome, Jeff. We're talking about the minutes from last meeting. If you have any comments on it. Okay. So in view of the issue with the abstention and Cheryl had listed as unanimous, we're going to change the vote a little bit. We'll vote for the minutes. I'll ask for those that approve, those that don't approve, and those that may abstain. And if nobody abstains or disapproves, then we'll consider it a unanimous vote. As opposed to going name by name on every single item, if that makes sense. So with that in mind, is there a motion to accept the minutes from our last meeting on April 6th? Looks like Lene is on mute, but
I'll move. Yes.
Okay, so she's moved. Is there a second?
Second.
I'll second it.
Okay. Sounds like Jeff was first in on the second. And all those in favor, raise your hand, give a thumbs up or whatever. I'm in favor. Are there any opposed? Hands up or speak up. And any abstentions? Hands up or speak up. With no abstentions and no objections, Cheryl, I think it's carried unanimously to accept the minutes as amended on the comments from our last meeting. Okay.
So what I'll do is I will send those to you. If you could sign them and send them back.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, next item on our agenda is the traffic impact study 101. I'm going to guess that's either Brady or Sam. We'll take the lead on that conversation.
Marlon, I thought that was you too.
Well, okay, good. We're moving on to item number 3 for transportation.
Yeah. No, yeah, I'll be presenting on the traffic impact studies here. So we obviously get new developments coming through or redevelopments, and some of those require traffic impact studies. So we did kind of want to go over that a little bit, kind of, discuss what is a TIS, when the city requires TISs. So TIS, obviously traffic impact study, just kind of refer to it likely from that here on out. Kind of what they include, and what we kind of look for when we review them, and some of kind of the methodologies and those type of things with those. So let me go ahead and share my screen here real quick. Can everybody see my screen okay?
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's kind of get started here. And I'd like this just to be interactive. If you have questions, need clarification or anything like that, feel free to chime in and have a discussion on this. Don't know, anybody's level with some of these type of things, familiarity or anything like that. So feel free if something's just not making sense or you just don't know what it is, feel free to kind of ask and we can kind of go into detail on something if we need to, or also if you feel like something's missing. So let's go over what is a TIS, a traffic impact study. So it's a study that determines the potential traffic impacts from a proposed development, and that can also be redevelopment as well on the roadway system. It's used to identify, review, and make recommendations for mitigations to potential impacts, if there are any, from that project or development. So this just kind of outlines a little bit here when the city requires a TIS. So for example, if we receive a site plan coming through reviewing, if it meets some of these requirements, we would require a traffic impact study to be done. So if a development had 75 or more parking stalls, if they were required to have at least that, we would require a traffic impact study. A drive-up window, that's one that we always kind of want to be careful with, especially along arterial roads and all that kind of stuff. Really any public road, just in terms of queuing back onto those roads, we want to make sure that we're not going to have that happen, and we have an idea of the potential for that and to help mitigate that. Developments that have more than 2 drive approaches from dedicated streets. Corner lots where one or more of the streets is a collector or arterial street will require a traffic impact study. And then we also have our transportation master plan also provides guidance with that as well, really in terms of, average daily traffic, ADT as it's referred to, acronym there, and thresholds there in terms of, what level for a traffic impact study and kind of what we'd potentially require or could be required for that. So
Brady, that graphic you just had on that screen, that's not Orem, that's AF, right?
Yes, yeah. Okay. And so that's just, so that's just an image. That's really one of the diverging diamond interchanges there, where you kind of come over here and you actually cross over on the other side and then cross back over through there. Yep. Okay, so what's in a TIS? So here's some common things that are in a traffic impact study. It's not all inclusive. There could be some things missing, but we want them to have a purpose, and the scope of the study. Obviously, identifying the project location. Where's it at? We want them to describe the analysis methodology just to make sure that it's meeting standard practices there. We'll kind of go over that in a little bit of what that is and what is utilized in terms of that methodology there. Obviously, description of the project, the data collection efforts. We want, things like existing and proposed access locations, trip generation and distribution. This is obviously what we, kind of identifies the intensity of the project, how many trips it's going to, generate on a daily basis, as well as, during the peak periods, whatever that may be defined as. Any assumptions, used during the analysis, we want that included in the traffic impact study so that we can make sure that they're sound assumptions and that things are explained so that we can understand how they maybe came to conclusions or how the results came about. Obviously, the alternatives that are analyzed, is it existing conditions plus projects? Is there any future, scenarios involved? Identifying any safety issues, things like sight distance issues and those type of things. And then, want to have detailed results of the analysis. We want, actually output from, the traffic simulation models that are used there, so we can kind of verify and look at those. And then obviously, the recommendations that they, recommend in terms of mitigating potential issues. Any questions on that? Okay. So in terms of analysis methodology, the highway capacity manual is kind of the standard practice for that. Term of level of service, LOS, is used to kind of, it's a scale from A to F that with A being the best and F being the worst in terms of looking at delay per vehicle for that. So when we're looking at intersections and they're being analyzed, this is, you know, the standard practice that is used and the methodology that is used. So we want to make sure, you know, when they're coming through that they are meeting these requirements and including this methodology. There's different thresholds in terms of signalized versus unsignalized intersections. So here we got a little table right here with the level service A through F for signalized intersections and unsignalized intersections. And one thing to note with that, if you kind of look, let's go to a level service D, for example. If we were looking at that, you'll notice that the delay for a signalized intersection is higher than the delay for an unsignalized intersection. And that's really, it's more, the expectation is that people are more willing to wait longer at an intersection for a couple reasons. They understand that it's, you know, usually more congested there, as well as, you know, they know that eventually they're going to get a green arrow or a green signal or something like that to let them eventually move through. So it's really kind of a expectation and perception thing, you know, where unsignalized intersections, that, you know, that delay and expectation and willingness to wait there, you know, isn't as high as it would be at a signal. So any questions with any of that yet?
I have a question. So for average delay, like what's the methodology? So the way you get that is essentially like, if I'm hitting a green light, it's a 0 delay.
Correct.
And then, so do you count the number of cars that go through go through with no delay? And then you, like, if a whole batch stands like one signal, you then average that out? Is that like how it works, or like what's the methodology?
Yeah. And the highway capacity manual kind of defines that, and it is that. I mean, it's those who are stopped at that red light, and it's the time that they're sitting there waiting, and then based off the number of vehicles that are there waiting, right? And that's averaged out. And I kind of point down here just a little bit, Jeff. So on a two-way stop control, that's based on the worst movement, would kind of be identified, and that's what would be reported. Where like a signalized intersection, that average delay is for the entire intersection that they look at. So they're actually looking at all approaches and movements in terms of, correct, yep, to get an overall, you know, level of service to determine whether you know, the intersection is operating acceptable. And as kind of note down here at the bottom, highway capacity manual is defined, you know, level service D or better as acceptable. So once we start getting into the level service E or F, that's when we're, you know, looking at, you know, obviously F is failing conditions, you know, E is, we're approaching there. You could look at it as like a glass of water. A has a little bit of water, B, C, and as we get to F, it's overflowing with water there. So that's kind of with that. So does that help answer your question? Okay. Anything else on that? So that's really important. I mean, you know, that's really what these traffic studies are kind of based on, and that kind of stuff is this methodology here that the highway capacity manual has defined with that. So.
Do you car count, like, do you determine this based on like those lines in the road? I'm more just curious than anything, like the wires, or is it like by camera?
So I'll go with this. So really with these traffic impact studies, so we have analysis tools. It's really micro simulation software that is utilized in these. And so we'll go over here a little bit, kind of, you know, data collection, what that is, and then that gets put into these simulation models, and that's where they calculate it. You know, they have the methodology of the HCM based in there, and then that's how it spits out the results, and that's how you kind of get that information. I think you're just kind of more referring to like the detection and all that kind of stuff at intersections initially, I think, in terms of kind of determine number of vehicles and stuff like that there. So it's not to that it's actually, you know, they take these, they do data collection, they put that information to these simulation models, and then they spit out the results with that.
Did you say you're going to cover the data collection further in your presentation here? Yeah,
I think here in a few slides here. So kind of a TIS process, this is kind of typical of what you could see, you know, with this. where we want the existing conditions documented, right? And so that is the data collection. That's where we're going out, getting the traffic counts and those type of things there. And then obviously an important thing is to estimate the new trips, right, of the proposed development. And this is based off ITE, Institute of Transportation Engineers. They have a trip generation manual, and that's kind of like the standard practice to utilize that to estimate trip generation. We'll go over that here in a little bit as well, and kind of look at some charts and all that kind of stuff on a specific land use, and kind of look at what that looks like. Once those trips are calculated, those are assigned to the network. And so, you look at and assigning them, in terms of distribution and all that kind of stuff, where potentially people could be coming from, going to, existing land uses, that are generators, freeway locations and all that kind of stuff, to help kind of get that distribution, as well as the existing traffic patterns. Once those are done, the GIS will assess the impact. So again, using the highway capacity manual thresholds, looking at existing conditions versus kind of that plus project conditions, and what are the impacts that we're seeing, if any. And then determine the appropriate mitigations. I put on here like a signal, right? There could be some intersection that's failing, and before the project come in, it's operating acceptable. It could come with a project and it's failing. We do signal warrants. Those signal warrants meet, and as a result, look at potentially putting in a signal because of the project. Turn lanes as well. That could be a left turn lane, right turn lane, deceleration lanes, those type of things, as well as potentially roadway widening with that. So, okay, so a little bit with data collection here. Typically, it's also depending on the land use of when it's, considered kind of the peak trip generation time. But typically traffic volumes are counted on a Tuesday, a Wednesday, or a Thursday. We consider those typical. You kind of get on Mondays and Fridays, people leaving early, or people are gone in general, or coming back from a vacation and those type of things. So it's typically counts are done on Tuesday, Wednesdays, and Thursdays. They're done between the AM and PM peak periods. So that's typically 7 to 9 and in the morning, and 4 to 6 in the afternoon. And so they'll go out there and they'll count for those 2 hours. They'll analyze that and determine when the actual peak hour was. So that's the consecutive 15-minute periods for that.
So
would define the peak hour.
What if there's an in and out going in on University Parkway? Would they maybe change that to catch the lunch hour? Sure.
Yep, absolutely. And so it is dependent, like I said, kind of on the land use. On a Saturday, if you had a big, department store or something like that was coming in, right, would maybe want to look at a Saturday and see what that looks like, because that could be the peak generator, and all that kind of stuff could actually result in the busiest time and show like the greatest impacts to the roadway network. So it is dependent kind of on that land use and when you expect to have people come and go with that. So the thing that, you can still have the project generate a lot of trips, but maybe the Saturday volumes are really low, so they wouldn't. But it would be one that you'd likely maybe want to require Saturday as well, in terms of including your typical AM and PM peak, just to kind of make sure you're capturing everything there. So.
And how is that determined as to make sure you're capturing everything?
In terms of?
So the geographic area, what's going?
Why would you do a Saturday? Are there a specific set of criteria that says, better do a Saturday?
So I think on that, like I said, it's kind of like on the land use and looking at that, and you can use when they kind of do their trip generation stuff, that you can kind of determine what is generating the most trips. Was it a Saturday? Was it a weekday? You can have times, for example, a school, right, can kind of go in and maybe you'd want to make sure that you're capturing the peak period of a school and all that kind of stuff if something was going in right next to it.
So if you knew there was a swap meet, just 3 blocks away every Saturday, would that be an important thing to know? How would the engineering firm know about that, or how would you make sure that they knew about that?
Well, a lot of this stuff, and we don't always get it, but there are some firms who do reach out, and that way we can kind of discuss those type of things and require those and ask for that to be done. If they submitted it and we knew about it, we would still, that would be a comment, right? Hey, there's this heavy generator of trips on a Saturday that's within the vicinity of the study area. We'd like you to include a Saturday analysis as well.
How do you determine the vicinity of the area?
It's really just kind of looking at, you want adjacent signalized like intersections and all that kind of stuff. There's not some specific criteria for that. You look at the project location. You want to make sure you're capturing, like I said, adjacent intersections really with it. So it kind of just depends on the project location of what you're looking at, as well as kind of like the intensity of the project as well, to where you feel like that could really, impact other locations as well.
So there's a little bit of art with the science.
Yeah. I mean, with it all, it's not just specific, with that, and not some easy way to always determine what is required with that. It varies. Any other questions with that? Kind of the traffic stuff?
So can I ask one thing? So how do you determine if something else needs to be considered? So if someone brings up a point to you, I need you to look at this swap meet that happens 3 blocks away. Is it the engineering firm that needs to determine that, or does that then come when you do your checklist?
Well, I don't know if there's specific with that, really. In terms of, I mean, I guess we'd have to know that it's there, right, in order to have it be required with it. But like I said, there's still just, so somehow we'd want to let the engineer know that that this is, whether it's others or ourselves or something like that, right? To get that information that we feel like it's not capturing, potentially a peak time period of when it's the busiest or something like that. Yeah, and there also there's tools out there as well that are available that we can help kind of evaluate some of the peak time frames and stuff like that. So what Jeff was kind of mentioning, referring to like the detection and stuff like that. So we do have information at signalized intersections if that technology is there to kind of look at that. So we could look at a Saturday that's gone by, a week ago or whenever, and as long as that's up, kind of depending on when it was set up, to kind of really look at, is that busier than what the weekday is? What does traffic look like during that time? So it kind of can help with that, to kind of help determine, when is the peak period kind of at. So you could potentially do that. You could look at it for the weekdays. You could look at it for a Saturday and all that kind of stuff to kind of determine when that peak time frame is. Does that make sense? So there are existing tools out there that do help us kind of look into that and help us kind of to make that determination.
So when you say existing tools, do you mean existing data?
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. So those detectors, they're collecting data and all that kind of stuff on there, and so we can kind of utilize that to help us kind of determine when's the busiest time of day, and is it a weekday? Is it a weekend? Is it a Saturday? Those type of things.
And I think too, just to interject too, Brady, some of this too, when we look at our projects and we have traffic impact studies, if there's neighborhood meetings or things of that nature, if there's some sort of nuance about the area that we're not aware of, like say there's a swap meet that happens and we weren't aware of that use there, or it's a use that's permitted, but it actually generates a lot of traffic, and it's usually on a Saturday morning from 8 to 10, and if we're not aware of that, usually something like that surfaces, and then we can go ahead and instruct that firm to go ahead and include that in their analysis and collect that data to see what type of impact there is. Because I guess what we're trying to say too is that even though a development comes in and they bring in their impact study, if there's holes in it, if they're missing some data, there is a process to make sure that we're collecting all that. So we try and do the best we can to make sure we get as much data and information as we can to make sure that whatever's coming in is not going to create any more problems than what are there currently.
Great questions, though. It really is. So on that, back to kind of the data collection part. So, I mean, there's obviously the traffic volumes that are collected, but also, you know, when they're going out there, need to be looking at, you know, obviously just the roadway geometry, the number of lanes, you know, making sure that they're capturing right turn lanes, dual left turn lanes, those type of things, so that they're accurately replicated in their models. You know, speed limits, whether the intersection signalized or unsignalized, access locations, is a signal timing, is it, does it have a left turn arrow? Is it permissive protected? Which means, you know, if there's enough vehicles there, you'll get a protected left turn. At the other times, you know, we got the flashing yellow arrow, and that kind of happens there. Observing queuing that happens out there, we want to make sure that these models are accurately representing existing conditions, crosswalk locations, those type of things. And so I kind of did this little photo down here on this bottom right. This kind of looks like a video game, but this is, when I started out, this is actually, you know, go out and sit at an intersection, use this to actually count the locations there. So this is a JMAR counter here that you actually use and use to count intersections. A lot of times people these days actually set up cameras and those type of things and go out there, set those up, and then come back and count them. But it was almost felt like I was playing a video game those days.
So what are those when you see the line across the road? Is that like cars? How does that work?
So those are tube counters. So those are typically stuck out there, and they're used to collect traffic volumes. They can also be used to collect speeds and also vehicle classifications as well. And that's typically done, you know, when you'd see if you see more than one tube, you can capture some of that like speed and vehicle classification, because it'll look at like the axle spacing and all that kind of stuff that goes across there to help kind of identify that.
And I think too, I don't know if Taylor still uses them, Brady, but we do have some pucks. They're about the size of an iPad, and we'll actually nail those down into the asphalt, centered on the travel lane, and it essentially tries to do the same thing, kind of collect the electromagnetic field of the car, and it collects that data too. But I don't know if we have very many left, because I don't think it's anything that they still make. So.
And with the tubes, they're obviously, you know, you got to keep an eye on those, because obviously they can get ripped up if they're out there, right? Somebody drives over them, or they're out there, they kind of get tore up, and then they're not actually, you know, collecting the appropriate data. But and those are typically used to kind of get your kind of daily traffic volumes and stuff like that there. So we kind of do like people call like a 48-hour tube count with that to kind of help determine what you're kind of seeing there on a daily basis.
So typically someone sits in a car and just counts cars. Is that how the engineering firms do them now?
You know, I don't know. I think some of them can still do it this way, Lene, and that's what I'm saying. This little counter here that I have on here, yeah, some people can actually sit there and actually count, right? So they're pushing it for each one of these, and they put the direction of the intersection. But other times, some are using cameras, and they'll go out there and actually set up a camera on the signal pole that you can actually see all the intersection locations and all that kind of stuff. Then they could go back and actually just review that and start and count that way to kind of determine the traffic volumes.
And does it say in their report how they collected the data?
Oftentimes, no, it doesn't. No, it doesn't kind of specify that, how that was collected. Yep. Okay, any other questions on data collection? Okay, so this is just a little bit of kind of the intersection analysis tools here. There are multiple traffic simulation softwares out there that you can use. I would say, well, there's a handful of them really. The one that we obviously see a lot is called Synchro or SimTraffic. Those are used kind of for traditional 4-leg intersections, kind of your simple intersections, traditional intersections. 4-leg, they can be T intersections and that kind of stuff. But we start getting anything complex, back to like our diverging diamond interchange, continuous flow intersections, through turns and all that kind of stuff. This VISM here is used for that. Synchro and SimTraffic, it's actually from the same firm there, but the analysis is a little bit different. Synchro is what's called deterministic. And so you're basically putting information in, and it's going through equations from the highway capacity manual, and those are just being outputted to you. SimTraffic is stochastic, and so that it's variable. People, majority times will do a minimum of 10 simulation runs, and so you get kind of the variability, kind of randomness of typical traffic out there, and then those results are averaged together to kind of get your output there with that. Down here is just kind of some typical measures of effectiveness that are used, that are collected with these analysis tools, these simulation softwares. The delay that we see, that's what we use to kind of get that level of service. That's where we get that delay, the seconds per vehicle there. 95th percentile queue lengths. So that's the length of queues at an intersections that are only exceeded 5% of the time. And those are typically the threshold used when designing an intersection and all that kind of stuff. So if you're looking at something new and you have a traffic analysis done, it'll be designed to what the analysis shows in terms of the 95th percentile queues. And then also you can get travel times from that analysis as well to kind of determine, before the project, this is what a travel time was, and after the project, this is what it was, just to kind of show potential increase or non-change between the project and with and without it. Any questions there?
So I have one. So your 95th percentile queue length, is there like an ABCD rating on that?
No. So you're basically just comparing that to what's existing. So at an intersection, let's say, you've got a left turn lane there, and it has 150 feet worth of storage. But you go and you do your analysis, and after you do it, let's say before the project, it shows that the queue was 135 feet. So what that's telling us is that the storage length is has enough capacity to kind of fit everybody in there. The project comes back, with additional project trips, you look at it, it's 100 and let's say 200, just to kind of extreme. Well, okay, now we know that potentially there's going to be people in the left turn kind of queuing back through the through movements. We want to, extend that left turn so that we can ensure that it's going to kind of fit the capacity needed.
Okay, so stupid question. So does that mean that 95% of the people get through the light?
No.
They're sitting in the queue?
No, it does not. It's just in terms of, it's just a length, and that length is, 95% of the time people can and fit within that storage length. That's all it is. Yeah. Any questions there? Okay, so very important part in kind of traffic impact studies is obviously the trip generation. As I mentioned before, ITE, Institute of Transportation Engineers, is kind of the standard practice in terms of determining trip generation. They've got 9 land use groups. Those are kind of listed here. It totals 170 different land use types. And so going through doing your trip generation, you want to make sure that whatever that use is that's going in is, accurately represented in the ITE, just in terms of what's most similar to the development there. So this is just an image from ITE. So this is the services land use group right up here. And so what it kind of has, this has like a list of land uses under this land use group. Banks, if the project was going to be have a bank and it was going to be a walk-in bank, you'd use a 911, land use code 911. If you wanted to come through and you're doing a fast food restaurant with a drive-through window, you want to use 934. So they have these, and you want to obviously just pick the one that best represents that project there.
Do those correlate to trips at all, those numbers, or is that just a number given?
No, that's just the number given that kind of reflects that land use. We'll go over that a little bit here, Lene. So let's just take a little look at like 934, right? Fast food restaurants with a drive-through window. So this is one chart that you would see kind of in the ITE manual here, and this is based on a daily. So you kind of look up here. This is talking on a weekday, is what So once again, going back to your study, if they were doing it for a weekday, you'd be using this. The vehicle trip ins is kind of really the units of that study. So let's say you had a fast food restaurant coming through with a drive-through, and it was 2,000 square feet, right? That's kind of what you're looking at. And so this is per 1,000 square foot. So they give you, your average rate here of what that is. And at that time, so what you do if you had 2,000 square foot, fast food restaurant, to kind of get a rate of trip generation for the day, you take 2 times by this number right here to kind of get that, and that would kind of equate to what you would expect in terms of a daily trip volume there. There are times when so this line represents this average rate here, and there are times when a best fitted curve is provided with this as well, and that would that's what's kind of down here at this bottom. It says fitted curve equation not given, but there are those times when that is given, and there are requirements in the ITE manual to kind of suggest when you need to use like the average rate, when you need to use when it's recommended to use the fitted curve, as well as potentially collecting local data. They have information in here on some studies, and there's just not enough studies done, small sample size, and so you might have to go out and really kind of collect local data to get a good representation of what those project trips might be. ITE, I think, is oftentimes conservative in its trip generation with that, but that's good, because that'll help show us, kind of more of those, kind of potential impacts with that. But, and that's a lot of times with like mixed use developments and stuff like that. And I think that they're getting better and getting some new data and stuff like that as well with that. So
when you say conservative there, Brady, what you mean is that they're going to overestimate the number of vehicle trips so that you design to a maximum capacity as opposed. Okay.
It seems like research and studies like that stuff is done. Like I said, especially in mixed use developments, when you've got residential stuff, you've got office, you've got retail, and all that kind of stuff. It definitely tends to overestimate those trips. It's not really capturing really well kind of that internal capture that you get of people kind of just walking to those places and stuff like that, or biking, because they're in such close proximity with that. Okay. So obviously that's weekday. This next one is actually just the AM kind of peak here. It talks about 1 hour between 7 and 9 here. It gives you this average rate here again. So again, if we were a 2,000 square foot fast food restaurant, you'd be looking at like 80 trips during the AM peak hours, what you'd be expecting with that. During the PM peak here, you'd be looking at 64, 65, 66 type of a thing there. So that's used, that standard practice there, but it is an important part of the traffic impact study. It's important to have to make sure that whether they're using the average rate, whether they're using the fitted curve appropriately based on ITE recommendations with that there. So any questions with kind of trip generation? Okay. So I think this is it. This is, I think, really the last slide that we have. So when this comes through to us, I mean, we're really looking at, simply, with some of the analysis results and even the approach taken in the study, like, does it make sense, right? And that's looking at the results. For example, you might look at an intersection in existing conditions, and let's say that it's has 30 seconds of delay with it, and that's existing conditions. And then let's go say you've got the project, which is adding trips to it, but for the same intersection and location, the report's showing maybe 25 seconds of delay, and you'd ask yourself, okay, so trips have increased, but my delay decreased. Why is that, right? So those are some of the things that you do want to look for and look at, and there are some instances that can be the case. For example, a project that adds a lot of right turns could actually reduce delay at an intersection, because they're shown as cars still going through, but they're not having a lot of delay because they don't have to wait there, as similar as like a left turn would need to, in terms of associated delay. So there are those instances, but they are more rare. But those are some of the things that we want to look out for and be aware of, just to make sure that it makes sense. I mean, that's the big part of it. Verifying the assumptions that were made, making sure that, like I said before, that those are kind of laid out, and that the data provided is reasonable and accurate. There's a terminology of garbage in, garbage out, right? If that traffic being, volumes being used aren't accurately represented, right? You're not going to get the accurate results. So garbage in, kind of garbage out. So that is something that you need to make sure that the data is sound with that. And that goes again with the trip generations, as well as the roadway geometry, making sure that it's accurately representing what's out there, that they're not assuming that there's an extra through lane at an intersection, or that's what's kind of coded in their model when there's not. So potentially things are looking better than maybe what they would be with that. A big one is comparing existing conditions to the plus project conditions, kind of getting an idea of helps quantify like that magnitude of what those impacts really are. There are instances in the existing roadway network at locations where before a project even comes in, that the level service at intersections could be unacceptable. They could be level service E or even F, and a project does come in, but when comparing those from one to another, maybe they only are adding a couple seconds to an intersection and all that. So their actual impact to what's existing isn't significant. And that can be just not even for, unacceptable conditions, but actually, conditions where things are level service D or better, where the project's only adding, a couple seconds to an intersection as well. So that's important to know. So what are the actual, impacts, kind of like that delta between those two scenarios that you're looking at there. We want to make sure that the study is meeting all of our standards, all of our ordinances, and I think that's a lot of times like in terms of like access location and those type of things that we're in appropriate locations with that. And then we also want to evaluate the recommended mitigations. If they're provided, do they make sense? What does that really mean? Is this is it a project issue? Is it an existing conditions issue? Those type of things. So, Sam, anything you want to add?
The one thing that I do want to say is usually impact studies come in, and that's usually the first thing we do is we look at the approach, what makes sense, and there's usually holes in it. I mean, I can't think of a time where we've had an impact study that was submitted and we accepted it. There's usually something that they have to look at. There's something that they forgot. There's usually, they might be a little low on some of the volumes. Trip generation might make sense, but then they're talking about, hey, there's no mitigation measures required. So there's always something that we look at. And I mean, I think to Marlon's point, it is an art, but that's where you bring in engineering judgment and you realize, hey, these are the existing conditions and we know what's going on there, so we can tell right away. Are these? Is this engineer trying to come in a little low in hopes of not having to have their client put in more improvements than not, knowing that it's going to go through an iterative process, because the engineers are trying to make money, that they have a reputation, and they're doing what they can, right? They're doing what they can to help out their client. A lot of them already know that something's going to change and something has to be done, but they want to go through somewhat of a process. Now, usually it's not an egregious thing, and a lot of them recognize that, hey, yeah, we know that it makes sense to put in a right turn pocket or whatnot, or the volumes are that they are, and to their point too, they try and access some of our data, and sometimes our data is a little bit old, so they have to go out and collect it. So I guess, I mean, just to reiterate that this is usually an iterative process, and there are quite a few times where we have to get on the phone and talk through the process, and then I think both come to realize, oh yeah, we missed this, we missed that, yeah, we can include this and that to make sure that it isn't garbage in and garbage out.
May I ask a question?
Sure.
Do they typically submit the data with the report for you to peruse, or do you need to typically call them and ask them if you have questions about it?
No, usually I want to say usually part of the report is that data. They'll actually show the counts. They'll actually have numbers. I mean, right in the beginning of the report is usually an executive summary, and then it goes through some mitigation and things like that. And usually there's an appendix in the back that'll have that data. And then we can take, and usually if we can, we will take that data and compare it to ours. Because if we have, I know there has been a case where we had data that was older and the data was higher than what was submitted for existing, and this was all pre-COVID. So we kind of said, hey, I think you may need to go out and re-verify your counts, because yes, although you state here that you counted it, we actually have some data that's older and it was higher, and we're also part of this growing metro area of Provo and Orem, so I don't see people leaving. I actually see more and more folks coming here. So, but if they go out and do that, I mean, in this case, they came back with numbers that were more in harmony with what we are seeing. But I mean, there is that case of, yeah, no, traffic is dropped. So then we look at land uses and some other things to make sure that what they have submitted is true and correct.
So yeah, to that point, Lene, too. Yeah, I mean, our expectation is to always have that information, right? It, like Sam said, usually included in appendix where there's the traffic counts, what they had, and it's kind of identifying the day that they counted, and that information is actually usually in the report as well. But it kind of shows that and identifies kind of the peak hour through there, usually, as well. And then they'll have, the level service. So they do the output of, to kind of how they calculate, the delay to associate the level service to the intersections, as well as the queuing information that comes directly from those simulation softwares. So, and if that is not provided, so essentially we would ask, right? That would be one of the comments and stuff like that. Hey, provide your traffic count data, or provide the output from the simulation model that kind of shows us this information, so that we can actually verify that it's accurate, because there is that potential when they're transferring stuff from those outputs to tables in their report that they can push a number and all that kind of stuff, and so things aren't accurately represented, and we do look at that and kind of make sure that what they're reporting makes sense for that. So hopefully that helps. So to answer your question is, yes, we expect it to be there. It's not always there, and if it's not, we'll ask for it.
So I work for an engineering firm that does transportation, and we do some really big projects. I don't think we've ever worked for the city of Orem, but I would say that the goal is to balance, the the client wants to spend as little money as possible to improve the neighborhood. They want to build their building. The city wants the best possible infrastructure improvements and realistically to help that project, but also help other just general city flow, take advantage of the opportunity. And the engineer is in the middle trying to negotiate with both of them. And a conscientious engineering firm will find the middle ground as quickly as possible and reasonably as possible for both sides. But it's not always easy, particularly the bigger the project. When you have a multi-billion-dollar transportation project, those reports get really, really detailed and intense.
Yep. Well said, Marlon. Absolutely. We look at a lot of time with the developer. They're just wanting to check that box and kind of move on and spend the little as possible. Absolutely.
So how do you determine how do I say this? I'm not quite sure how to say this in the right words, but the distance of the impact project.
You cut out, Renee, the what of the impact?
So, this engineer is saying, we're just gonna look at this block. We're just gonna look at this block. But there's obviously going to be impact extending beyond that city block. At what point do you say, we need to look at this impact, a more extended impact?
Well, I still think it kind of comes down to the intensity of that use in terms of the trips. We have some guidance in our transportation master plan. I think when it gets a certain number of trips to kind of look at, quarter mile or half a mile kind of locations and stuff like that as well. So it kind of goes back to still kind of that art and all that kind of stuff in terms of what that project, what you'd estimate that project to kind of generate. I mean, it's hard to, for example, a project that's at Center Street and State, for example, to, that comes through and you going all the way down to the interchange and kind of associating that they're impacting that interchange. And so they need to make, improvements as a result of that, with that. So I think that's
I think an example is like the LDS Church when they build their temples. I remember the Mount Timpanogos Temple. They actually put in a road in front of the old Manila Church because they knew that little tiny road that was there, I think it was a negotiated thing, handled the traffic volume that was anticipated by that temple being put in. And that was a good 2-mile distance. Do you know what I'm saying? So I guess my question is, I'm guessing they volunteered that, or did some engineers say, this is going to have an impact on this street. What can you do about it? What can we do to work together to fix that? How would something like that be handled?
Either they volunteered it or the city asked for it.
Yeah.
And the answer is it could be either way. It depends on if they're aware of it. Most engineering firms, if they're aware of it, they would try to offer a mitigation, because you don't want it to come back from the city with, well, you forgot this, you forgot that, you forgot this. So the engineer wants to account for it, but they may not know the lay of the land. And an example going in right now is the temple in Orem here. They're making that a 5-lane on Geneva Road, just past the temple. So going south, it'll still be that 2-lane, but coming north up to the intersection, they're going to make the improvements.
Well, and I think to that point too, there's two different points with temples, I guess, since we're talking about temples. One, you're going to have the huge amount of traffic the weeks prior to it being dedicated. That's probably the most impactful a temple is. Once they're in operation, and that's the thing too, and Brady can speak to this, it's hard to find temples in the ITE trip generation because it's not there. So you either go out and you collect some data to see what you can see, like looking at Payson or Provo or Mount Tim, and get that data, and then you look at it, and then you look at the at what types of trips, and then for that site we actually made sure that they put in a center turn lane, even though and that's part of what that roadways section is supposed to be. But if there were no plans for Geneva Road, if UDOT was saying, hey, we're just going to keep it at 2 lanes, then that's where that impact study is going to say, hey, look, we're going to need a right turn decel, because you're going to have people traveling 55 miles an hour. They need to slow down because that radius is kind of tight. Give them a safe way to do that. And then you start looking at, okay, how many lefts are going to be here? And that's when the engineer is going to look at, well, you have 2 access points. One's off of Geneva Road right straight to the temple, and there's also one further to the north. So then when they do their model, they assume that, well, you know, there's going to be a few folks that are going to look at a map and say, hey, let's go ahead and take this route, or let's go straight to it. And then it's kind of a best guess as things even out, what are folks going to do? And they do a 60-40, a 50-50, 70-30 split, and then you just kind of run through those. And if we don't think it looks right, then we can say, hey, I think you need to change your assumption, move these around. It's going to be more here, there, or whatever. But, you know, there's definitely certain areas. If there's a median there, well, then we can assume a left in. And if there's only one access point, then obviously they're going to have to go, or, you know, some sort of a roundabout way. So I guess to Lene's point, it just kind of depends on where the development is and where their access points are, because in some cases, yeah, we're going to have to look at a half mile or a quarter mile out, because this is how they have to get there. And then I guess another point to be made is they're doing that. If some of these areas are close to a signal and they're showing, hey, it works great, then we want to look at their synchro model to make sure that what they put in there for signal timing is actually what is there, as opposed to being something that's optimal for what makes their development work. So yeah, there's a lot of moving parts in a traffic impact study. And if all else fails, I know Paul used to, on occasion, he would get up early and go, if there was some sort of a use that had a really large AM peak, he would get up early and go sit there and watch it, and then just kind of get a feel for where you know, a lot of those folks are. And then the same could be for the PM peak. I mean, we could go sit there and say, you know, these guys are saying it's 80-20. I think it's more of a 50-50. Well, we might have to go out there and visually watch it and just come back and say, hey, look, your model's wrong. You can't do it that way. You got to switch it up. So, I mean, I guess that the point is that this is an iterative process, and we do try and do our best to make sure we get it right.
So how much do you guys use Google Maps for what do I say, projected direction that people are, routes that people will be directed on?
Well, we have our aerial photos that we use for our development tracking. We got, so yeah, if we look at there, I mean, and what I try and do is, the only other person that I know that I kind of understand their driving habits is my wife. So I figure, okay, if my wife is heading south, how is she going to get to this spot? Because she doesn't use her phone. She's just going to know generally where it's at. How is she going to get there from southwest, east, or north? Because she drives totally different than I do. I always try to make sure that I can do I hate to make a left. I always like to make rights. So I will look at an area because I hate to go across traffic, especially if it's, you know, multiple lanes. So I try and make it easy. It might take a little bit longer, but I'd rather make a right than a left. So I guess, yeah, we do look at Google Earth, and we look at see if there's obstructions, you know, things that make sense or don't make sense. And you can look on maps and just kind of see through parking lots or roads kind of where there's more tire marks, you know, because there is kind of a silhouette there on the asphalt. You can kind of get a feel for where people generally are.
I think it's kind of generational too, don't you think? I know my kids are always putting it in their phone, and I'm just kind of driving because I know kind of where it is and trying to figure out what's like you. Do I want to turn right? What's the best way?
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's usually the kids are the ones who get there, and it's us that are going down and then having to do a U-turn and then do a U-turn. Like, I missed it. There it is. Where's this at? I think it was right here. And then we're probably the worst example there is.
Okay, how about another question? Sorry, real quick. Is the length of the deceleration lane determined by the speed on the street? How do you determine the necessary length of the deceleration lane?
Yes, I believe that is determined based off of your speed and I mean there's standards that are in the it's called AASHTO Green Book that have those in terms of taper lengths there that kind of give you that direction and guidance in terms of what that taper length should be based on speeds.
And then what about based on the shoulder of the road, the existing width of the shoulder of the road?
Again, there's standards that are set forth there in terms of what that should be. You know, there's oftentimes minimum of 2 feet shoulders, but there are times when projects come through and you know, there's the design exceptions and all that kind of stuff that they wanted to add an additional lane each way, and as a result, that's going to completely remove shoulders, you know. So there are those, but there are you know, usually standards and those type of design standards and stuff like that that are set forth to kind of help determine those minimums.
Yeah.
So you guys then follow those, right?
What's that?
You're saying you have these standards that you follow when you review the report.
Yeah, we have standards that we follow when we review the report. Yeah, I mean, like I was saying, we have stuff in our ordinances and standards and specifications and all that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Okay, sorry.
So, and I guess to your point too, Lene, is like, speaking of, you know, looking at lengths of decel lanes too. I mean, there is going to be a guide for that, but depending on, you know, is it close to a street? Is it close to an intersection? Is it close to someone else's driveway? Now, is this like for the Temple, for example, the right turn lane or that decel lane needed to extend, looking at speeds and use, it needed to extend back into the property to the south. But how can you go in and as if you're the Temple and say, hey, by the way, I need to take up some of your property for my taper to go into this right turn decel lane, which you really can't because it's still their property, and if there isn't a need, you can't necessarily encroach on someone else's property and take it. Now, you can if it's like a city project or something like that, but if it's a private project, I can't say, well, my use is going to need me to go ahead and take some of your property. I really can't do that. So you try, in some cases, you have to maximize and work with the constraints that are given as well. You don't always get a chance to do it exactly as the way the book says, unfortunately.
Yeah. Well, it sounds
So
like
does that then change the rating on the street?
What's that?
If you have a smaller, I'm thinking of Orem Boulevard. There's a housing project that has this little tiny little, like, I don't even know, 15 feet long or some deceleration lane. So then, you know, it's kind of a hazard if I'm behind someone that then decides they want to turn in there. Would that change any kind of rating on that road? So
now that is a little bit different. So you have to look at, so I don't know if, is that on the east side of the road, though, that older housing development?
Yeah. Where is that by suggestion?
Probably south of 4 South. It's been there for a while.
Yes.
So you got to realize too, the hard part is that some of these things happened years ago, and we didn't probably have all of these resources. So we thought, hey, this is probably the best we can, because I know that one was done. Gosh, I don't know how old that one was.
20
but
years.
Yeah, I mean it's been a while. So since then, things have obviously changed. We have a lot better tools, and there's much bigger and broader standards that would help us with things like that. So you're right. There are some that are quite small that, looking back, or if they were to come through now, they would be much longer and a little bit more safe.
But back to your point of, you can't take the land from the developer. How do you account for that then?
Well, it's the hard part is taking the land from someone else. So it's either, hey, you need to make this longer, and if you can't, then you need to change some things or reduce it. Because I know we had the same thing happen with, I want to say at 4 South and Orem Boulevard. As we're redoing that intersection, there's also a right turn pocket that's going to be installed there south of the Midtown 360. And just trying to work with constraints, even for the city. If we're trying to put in a right turn pocket and say it needed to be 120 feet and we can only get 110, well, we just based on the fact that there's a 6-foot diameter power pole there, then we'd probably look at, is this a design exception, or do we want to spend $100,000 to move this pole when really we're only going to gain 10 feet, and can we live with that small amount of delay and or level of service? So sometimes it is a function of economics, but if that isn't the case and they need to get it, if a developer, I'm trying to think of someone where we had them go and get some property because their development was so demanding, they had to do it.
Well, while you think of that, Sam, I want to maybe suggest that we move to the next item in the agenda as soon as we can. We got 20 minutes left, and the projects.
Can I just ask this question? So my question is then, if they cannot, because you don't want to take land, they don't have the appropriate length of a deceleration lane, do you then demonstrate that on the report by lowering the grade or whatever you want to call it on the level of service? Do you ever reflect that on the report to show it as a negative?
Well, I don't know if you'd, yes. So I think what you're saying in a time where, somebody has to, there's only like a through, right? Maybe turning into an access or something like that. There's not enough shoulder for somebody to kind of pull off. That should be reflected by the traffic simulation software, because that person behind them is likely going to have to slow down, which will, decrease capacity on that, right? Through there. So that will come out and be reflected in kind of the report, just in terms of the analysis and stuff like that. Does that make sense?
That does. Thank you.
Okay. Appreciate that conversation, Brady. Obviously, a lot of questions, and probably more when we talk about specific projects. But for the purpose of today, let's move on to the next item on the agenda, the transportation improvement projects. And again, I'm going to guess either Sam or Brady will give us an update on those.
Yeah, so I mean, just as a heads up, we are moving forward with our intersection improvement project. Component of it here is on Center Street in front of just on the south side of the city center, essentially not allowing left turns in at that westerly-most intersection or entrance, as well as some work up at 8th East and 8th North. Also, I wanted to get an idea too, if there's been any observations you guys have had on areas in town where it looks like it needs a right turn pocket. It looks like we need a longer left turn or dual lefts. Is there any uncontrolled intersections that look like they need to be controlled? We're looking for this year's TIP cycle, TIP being the Transportation Improvement Project with MAG, to get funding to move forward with an environmental process and get our Lakeview Parkway started, with Geneva Road being widened to 5 lanes, at least down to where Lakeview Parkway is going to be. We're going to go ahead and start moving forward with that project. But essentially giving you guys the option to, or I guess the opportunity to let us know. We do have a few projects that we've identified, probably looking to either put a signal or a roundabout at 4th South and 4th West. But just where I'm mainly here in my office, and then I get out on occasion, if there's things that you guys see here in the city that need some attention, whether it's signalizing things, crosswalks, stop signs, I guess it's kind of an opportunity for you guys to kind of share some of what you guys see as traffic and transportation observations you guys see in the city on a day-to-day basis.
Opportunities along sidewalks where that we can connect sidewalks and all that kind of stuff, where we have gaps and stuff like that as well. What you're saying,
cycling corridors, anything like that.
As we're out and about and take some notes, I'm going to guess that the process might be to send you guys an email, just says, hey, at the corner of this and this, suggest you look at that. And then once you guys collect some of those, then we'll discuss some more in detail in the setting.
Yeah, I think that could work.
Okay.
So there were 2 that Debbie and I talked about when we met last week, or whenever we did, I can't remember. The one is the shoulder line, the white shoulder line on Main Street in front of Windsor Elementary, to kind of try to push the cars to the center of the road for the kids who are riding their bikes on the way to the elementary school. Maybe we could talk about that sometime in the future. And then the other one I brought up was the Quick Quack driveway on 1600 North, the easement there for Ace Hardware that was necessary before the light was put in, just 100 feet, 150 feet down the road. But it because there's no shoulder on that road, it does create a situation where cars stop to turn right in there, and it's quite unanticipated.
Does that happen frequently?
Yes, very frequently.
Okay.
Jeff, it looked like you had a suggestion or two.
I'm typing them out, but yeah, I was
Okay.
just gonna say, I can type it out, but basically I was gonna say, because I've been trying to observe, obviously very biased by my movement around the city, but like state and 1200 South always seems like kind of a mess. You get like a lot of backup on the 1200 South light, and then it doesn't clear out by the time the red light hits on Parkway, and it just seems like a lot of people are kind of hitting both those lights. 400 West, this is more of a potential like roundabout, but there's just massive backlog at 400 West and 400 South. Did you already say that one?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Looking at potential roundabout or signal there at that location, Jeff.
Yeah, that's that one's quite bad. And then the other one that I noticed is 800 South and 800 East gets really, really bad in the late afternoons.
8 South
Where
and
was that?
800.
East, South, and what?
800 East. It's another kind of situation where you have double lights, because you have the light coming out of the Costco. And when Costco and they put in a Quick Quack there recently, and so Costco and Quick Quack get a crazy amount of volume. So you get like a lot of backlog at that first signal, and then it kind of bleeds to the next one, and it just takes a lot of time to move through there. Traffic does not move through there very well at all.
Okay,
Yeah.
great.
So those are my 3 main observations.
And with some of those, we can have our traffic engineer maybe look at, I would think, some of that signal timing and see if there could be some tweaks or something like that that could be made to kind of help out those intersections if we're kind of seeing that.
Are these so Jeff, are these all like PM peak times? Is that when you see all this?
Yeah.
Okay.
And AM, the state 100, 1200 South is also AM peak.
State and 12 South is AM peak?
1200 South. It's that light that's
The
right.
1200 South leg.
Yeah.
Yeah, and just as an FYI, that eventually that signal will be removed. So you'll just have a right in, right out there. And as development happens, at least that's the plan. As development happens, then hopefully there's a connection to 1150. But that signal will actually be moved back further to the north.
That seems like it's a really weird place for a signal. It seems like there should just be like a median there, and then if you have to for some reason cross into the mall, just go around and flip a U-turn instead of blocking that main flow. It's really weird.
Yeah. There's plans. The mall is looking to try and acquire some property so they can account for a dual left in, because we understand that we need to modify the signal operations there at Parkway and State. And and part of that is moving that signal back to 1150, and the model shows that a dual left into the mall property works well and a dual left out, but there's no condemnation rights or anything because that east side of the intersection is all private property. So until they can accommodate for that, the signal won't be moving anytime soon.
Yeah,
Carl,
not to
you
mention,
raised your hand?
that?
I just wanted to put in my bid again for 16th North and 4th East, and the traffic control there for pedestrians and cyclists on the Murdoch Canal Trail. I'd sure like to see something happen there.
Maybe we can report back in June, because Taylor did go out and he did some signal modifications there to hopefully help with compliance. But we'll kind of have to pick his brain to see what happened with that, what he saw, and then we can look at trying to implement our scramble or diagonal type crossing there.
Right. Sounds good. Thanks.
Okay. Seems like conversation on this topic has died down a little bit. Obviously, if things come up in the interim, we can email, communicate about them, and then discuss them in upcoming meetings. The last item on our agenda is just questions, comments, and our next meeting will be June 1st. It looks like we're on a pattern for the first Tuesday of each month.
Yeah.
Correct. Yep.
Okay, so plan on that. Any comments or questions about today's meeting?
I had a question about that proposed apartment complex on 16th North and 4th West.
I haven't
And,
heard of that. Is there
that's-
actually something like that happening?
Yeah, really.
Weird. I haven't heard anything about that.
You should get out more, Sam.
Yeah.
I guess. I just thought it was smooth sailing here.
Yeah. So has the traffic study there been discussed at all in these meetings here? Or I'm just
You know what?
wondering.
That's probably the only traffic study I've seen that is perfect, and we're just going to accept it as it is.
Yeah.
That's what I hear in the media.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, oh my gosh, I wish people would just pump the brakes a little bit. It's not even close to being ready. That's okay. So yeah, what did you want to discuss, Carl?
Well, I'm just wondering, has the traffic study been completed on there, or is it in progress, or what?
They have submitted a traffic impact study. So they have completed their first iteration, but by no means have we accepted it.
Okay. So as I'm understanding this project, the only access is off of 1600 North. Is that correct?
They have two. They have one off of 16th, and then they have another one that's off of State through an easement. So there are two access points for this development.
So I guess my concern is if people were coming out of this development and wanting to turn left onto 1600 North going east, would that be a possibility? Or is
Nope.
it, okay, so they could only turn going west?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, that as a result of that project, we'd require that access on 1600 North where you can turn left in or left out to be closed off with the median.
Okay. Yeah, that
So
sounded
is
like
that-
it'd be a terrible mess.
Right,
So-
and I mean, and that project specifically too, to a comment and question that Lene had is like, yeah, that's a project where maybe the right turn decel lane would be, say if it needed to be 500 feet, well, we couldn't do that because it would physically go through the intersection
Right.
and be into those homes. So you kind of work with what you have, understanding too that, you know, even though the speed is posted at, what is it posted there? Lene,
35.
55, I think
35.
35. So I mean, so if I mean, you try and work with what you can, and understanding it's not a perfect situation. But two, with that being said, you want to make sure that you're not going to create, you know, what is the existing level of service there for 16th North? What is the level of service there at the intersection? How many trips are going to be generated? Because you're right. I mean, for what's going there, I mean, it's kind of one of those things. It's like, so it's a residential, it's a mixed use. Okay. Likely there's not going to be a huge retail commercial demand there unless they dropped in a Chick-fil-A or an In-N-Out, which is not going to be your typical type fast food type places, right? Those guys have huge lines, and then you're looking at a totally different scenario. So
Right.
it's tough. It's tough because Orem is built out, and we're trying to work with what we have, and then we're holding them accountable to make sure that what they're putting in there is going to work, because we don't want to have something that's going to create a huge hazard to the whole traveling public. So that's kind of where we're at with that guy.
Okay,
And I
appreciate
guess a
that.
big one with that, can I just add a big one with that is that, I mean, I live in that area, of course you all know. And I just want to know if a traffic study then considers other travel routes. Because like you were saying, Sam, when I come from the canyon, I do 8th North, 8th East, 1600 North to get to my house, and I'm only 2.5 blocks east of State Street. So
Right.
I do not go 8th North to State Street to turn left or turn right onto 1600. You know, I don't do that just because I avoid State Street. So I guess that's my question on the extended impact of a development like that.
Sure, and I mean, and that's where we look at. So if this project were to create 100 trips, and if we were to say 80 of those trips were to come the same route that you travel, okay, then we'd look at, okay, what's the existing conditions? What's the capacity of 16th North as we're heading east or westbound? Well, if we already have 6,000 cars that are heading, or we have 500 cars or whatever, how many in that peak hour is that going to change it? If we're already at level of service C, now we add 80 trips, now we're still at a level of service C to a D. Obviously it increases it, but is it by much? I mean, you kind of want to look at how many trips in that peak hour, what's there existing, and then is it now a tipping point or not? I mean, for me, I think the biggest issue that's going to happen on this corridor is not going to be what's here at 4th West. It's going to be whatever happens to the tech park. If all of a sudden you got a big call center which is allowed to be there, or if they decide to redevelop, that's when you're going to see a bigger uptake in 16th North, and that's where we're going to look at, okay, now it's probably getting to the point to where we need to widen it and maybe get into a MAG-funded project, and we're purchasing homes to widen the corridor. I mean, that's kind of the reality. I mean, and the thing is there's going to be folks that are going to come up 16th North going to the Temple. I mean, and that's the hard part, is you're thinking, oh, these people living in this high density. It's like, well, what are you going to say about the people going to the Temple? Are they dirty, rotten buggers too? I mean, they're going to the Temple. You know what I mean? So it's like, I don't know what to say, but we're just growing.
The reason that is said is because that's trips on the road. That's and that's, like you said, there's not a line for Temple trip goers.
Right, there isn't.
How many trips it's going to generate per day.
Yeah.
So that's an unknown, right?
Yeah. Because go ahead.
Well, no, I was going to change the subject. You go ahead and finish.
No, I'm good. Go ahead.
Okay, so my question is, when you said about closing the median right there, so is Orem City doing that in order to accommodate the developer, to make the developer's traffic study work?
To make it work?
Wouldn't the developer have to close the median as part of their mitigation?
Right. That's exactly right.
So they would be paying for it.
Well, right, but isn't that taking away an access for normal residents who, like, I have a storage unit in State Street Storage. I got a big trailer and it's easier to turn through there than if you close that off. Do they consider?
Well, yes and no. I mean, I think you look at, one, is it going to be safe? Two, I think when you're looking at a PM peak type scenario, granted, it's just like we had this discussion about the State Street mobility study. During a PM peak, and if there's that big of a demand, chances are your level of service is an F or worse, right? So if I had to guess, if you're going to turn into there with your trailer, it's not going to be during the PM peak. You're probably going first thing in the morning or sometime, because you're in the area, when the travel demand is a lot less, and it's going to make sense for you to hurry and get down there with your trailer, get out, because as the day goes on, you're not going to be able to do it. You'll be waiting there forever. So I think there's that component to where, is it really going to really happen with the amount of queuing that's going to happen there? And then two, it's like, okay, but if we leave that there, are we going to run the risk of accidents? Because there's going to be a few cars that are going to stop. There's going to be some that aren't. Or now, to Brady's point, now if you're backed up there, there's more folks backed up there. Now we're backed up into the through lane, and now we're interrupting signal operations. Really, it doesn't make any sense to have that there. Let's go ahead and eliminate that, because now there's more of a global impact, for this little area, if you will. So that's why we would go ahead and remove that. And likely too, it's like anymore, we have a development that's going to come in on 2000 South and Geneva Road. Right now, it's just his development. There's 200 units or 250 units, so it's pretty easy for them to do a left in and a left out. But as they come through, I also want them to run the analysis with the right in and a right out, because it's not guaranteed that they will always have that there. And I want to make sure that they have the access points and that there's the decel lanes there to make that work, because we're just growing so fast that what we think we have today is not going to be necessarily what we have tomorrow, as far as, you know, at least when I look at left turns.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we've met our time frame. I know that there's this discussion, particularly that particular development, could go on for a long, long time. But we probably ought to call it. We've lost some bodies already. So at this point, let's go ahead and terminate the meeting if we can get a motion, and we'll see you next month.
And just to add, if any of you guys have questions about anything, Brady and I are available most any time. So if you guys have any other questions, you want to talk about things, talk through things. If you want to argue about things, we can do that too. But I mean, that's what we're here for. Not that I want to argue with you guys, but
It's a healthy debate. I mean, argue. Healthy debate.
Well, I saw
I
Brady.
like that too.
Brady reacted with a smile when you said argument. So like, it's kind of like he's waiting for one there. Anyway,
I make a motion that we adjourn. How about that?
Motion to adjourn. Is there a second?
I second.
Yeah. All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, we'll go ahead and adjourn. Thank you all for your time.
Yep,
Thanks,
thank
everyone.
you.
Have a good night.
Uh-huh.